Why do Jews and Arabs, Muslims hate each other? First, it is important to understand that not all Arabs are Muslims, and not all Muslims are Arabs. While a majority of Arabs are Muslims, there are many non-Muslim Arabs. Further, there are significantly more non-Arab Muslims in areas such as Indonesia and Malaysia than there are Arab Muslims. Second, it is important to remember that not all Arabs hate Jews, not all Muslims hate Jews, and not all Jews hate Arabs and Muslims. We must be careful to avoid stereotyping people. However, generally speaking, Arabs and Muslims have a dislike of, and distrust for Jews, and vice versa. Many don't understand the long-term hostility that the Jews and most Muslims, Arabs have for one another. The issue began with Abraham's bad choices that had generational impacts. Initially, Abraham's disobedience to God has resulted in this hostility that continues today. The hatred, animosity, dislike and distrust between the two people groups is a direct result of Abraham's impatience. Abraham was promised by God to have a male child, an heir, who would not only be the father of millions but also eventually be in the lineage of the Messiah. Abraham decided to take matters into his own hands, when at an old age he determined that God possibly needed help to fulfill his promise. It is worth mentioning here that circumcision was first implemented on Abraham as a reminder that God is in charge of procreation, not man's seed alone. Abraham, whose name was Abram at the time, and his wife, Sarai, decided to speed up the fulfillment of God's promise by impregnating Sarai's servant, Hagar. As Abraham at the time was 86, they thought they were too old to produce offspring. The son that was born of Hagar, in the disobedient act by Abraham and Sarai, was named Ishmael, and all of the factors involved became the root cause of the generational hostility between the two sons of Abraham. Years after Ishmael's birth, God did finally fulfill his promise by providing a son, Isaac, to Abraham, who was 100 at the time, and Sarah, who was 90. As a result, the Jews are descendants of Abraham's son Isaac, and the Arabs are descendants of Abraham's son Ishmael. With Ishmael being the son of a slave woman and Isaac being the promised son who would inherit the blessings of Abraham, obviously there would be some animosity between the two. As a result of Ishmael's mocking Isaac later in their lives, Sarah talked Abraham into sending Hagar and Ishmael away. Likely, this caused even more contempt in Ishmael's heart toward Isaac. An angel told Hagar that Ishmael would be the father of a great nation and, interestingly, that Ishmael would be a wild donkey of a man, his hand will be against everyone and everyone's hand against him, and he will live in hostility toward all his brothers. Genesis 16:12. However, the ancient root of bitterness between Isaac and Ishmael does not explain all of the hostility between Jews and Arabs today. The Arabs believe that Ishmael as firstborn, is the true, holy and rightful heir of Abraham and all the promises of God, while the Jews believe that Isaac was the only legitimate son and heir. Because of the Arabs' beliefs, an entirely separate and totally different religion was founded which the majority of Muslims follow, called Islam. More than 2.5 millennia since the initial conflict between two half-brothers, the descendants of Ishmael perverted the image of God and assembled their own doctrines that contradict and refute every major Bible teaching, in their holy book called the Quran. They even downgraded Jesus from the Messiah to just a prophet, entirely stripping off his divinity. The religion of Islam, which a majority of Arabs follow, has made the hostility predicted of Ishmael more profound. The Quran contains somewhat contradictory instructions for Muslims regarding Jews. At one point it instructs Muslims to treat Jews as brothers and at another point commands Muslims to attack Jews who refuse to convert to Islam. The Quran also introduces a conflict as to which son of Abraham was truly the son of promise. The Hebrew scriptures say, it was Isaac. The Quran says it was Ishmael. The Quran teaches that it was Ishmael whom Abraham almost sacrificed to the Lord, not Isaac, in contradiction to Genesis 22. This debate over who was the son of promise further contributes to today's hostility. Another root of the conflict between Jews and Arabs is political. After World War II, the United Nations gave a portion of the land of Israel to the Jewish people. At that time Israel was governed by the British and primarily inhabited by Arabs, as the result of 400 years of the Ottoman Empire occupation of the land. Most Arabs protested vehemently against the new Israeli state, even as they refused an Arab-Palestinian state offered as part of the UN plan. Arab nations including Egypt, Jordan, Iraq, and Syria attacked Israel in an attempt to drive them into the sea, but they were defeated. The defeat of the Arab forces soon became a human tragedy when the surrounding Arab nations refused to absorb the Arab refugees from Palestine. Ever since 1948, there has been great hostility between Israel and its Arab neighbors. The tensions have been stoked by political rhetoric, and the existence of groups such as Hamas with their continuing obsession with wiping out the Zionist entity, and reversing the results of 1948. Israel exists on one tiny stretch of land surrounded by much larger Arab nations, such as Jordan, Syria, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and Egypt. Biblically speaking, Israel has a right to exist as a nation in its own land that God gave to the descendants of Jacob, grandson of Abraham, Genesis 12:7. But it looks like that God does not grant the Israelites peace as well as land, and the reason might be their rejection of God's only begotten Son who came to them as the Messiah. The descendants of Isaac and Ishmael have been in conflict since around 2065 BC. There has never been a period of time when they weren't in conflict with each other, and there never will be. One should not make the mistake to think that the war between Israel and Hamas will be over soon, or ever. This war has been going on for thousands of years, and it will not be settled, until Jesus makes his return. When the final war is fought, it is Jesus himself who will strike the final blow and usher in a new world with true peace, anchored by the Prince of Peace himself. But only those who have bowed their knee in complete surrender to Jesus Christ, and believed in his atoning death on the cross and glorious resurrection from the dead, will be on the winning side. And it applies to Jews, Arabs and Gentiles all over the world. For whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord, shall be saved. Romans 10:13.